So as you just heard, this webinar is being recorded, and I will share more on that momentarily. Alrighty, well, while we wait for a few more people to come in, I'm going to go ahead and run through some housekeeping slides and introduce our speakers. So APA Virginia, your hour, excuse me, with APA Virginia is sponsored by the Berkeley Group, and we are very grateful for their generous support. This month, we are very pleased to have the Honorable Thomas Blackwell and Jamie Timberlake to present the Commissioner of Revenue's Solar Revenue Options presentation. As you can see, we have this webinar certified for AICP credit, and I will share this information in the chat box shortly as well. I will also be sharing links to our chapter's website, which is actually under construction. You may notice some updates, but we really appreciate your patience as we get it up to date and share important, relevant news and opportunities to get involved with the chapter. So we really do encourage questions, but please submit your questions through the Q&A box. This will just help me keep track of all inquiries for our speakers. You can also use the raise hand feature to request to be unmuted during the more formal Q&A portion. And at that point, I would just allow you to unmute yourself and we would go from there. You can use the chat box to ask me any logistical questions. And we will also be using the poll feature throughout this presentation just to help keep everybody engaged. So we have some fun quizzes involved, and you will see those populate on your screens as we get started. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing our screen and hand it over to Tommy Blackwell. But everyone, thank you so much for joining. I think we have a really great and informative webinar ahead of us for a topic that is very pressing and very important.
Thank you, Jillian. I'd like to welcome everyone. This is Tommy Blackwell from downtown Tappahannock, and this is Tappahannock on the Rappahannock in the background. And just before I share my screen, I am going to change this background because it can be a little disconcerting. And now we'll go to try to get started here. So as Jillian introduced me, I'm Tommy Blackwell. I'm the Commissioner of the Revenue in Essex County. And I'm part of the Association of Commissioners of the Revenue, Virginia Commissioners of the Revenue Association of Virginia. We're about 135 strong commissioners, and then we also have our deputies. And over the last 2 years, we've been dealing with how to address the solar revenue impacts for our localities. And our perspective is as the tax collector, as the ones who assess these facilities. So just to give you a little overview, we're going to address 2 major areas today in this hour: the revenue impact of utility scale solar and the revenue impact of residential and mixed use. We will spend most of our time on the utility scale. We will touch briefly on residential and mixed use. And under the utility scale solar, the areas that primarily concern commissioners of the revenue, tax assessors, is the assessment of the real estate, the actual land, and other things like fencing, anything else other than the actual solar facility, the equipment. So we will look at briefly the real estate, assessing the machinery and tools exemption that has been implemented by the Commonwealth, and then more recently, the ability to do an energy revenue sharing agreement in a locality. We're going to look at siting agreements a little bit, even though commissioners of revenue are not that involved in the siting agreements. So we will touch on that, and we'll also briefly look at the emerging field of agrivoltaics. Then under revenue impact of residential mixed use, we're going to look at the ground mount, rooftop, and some solar shingles. We'll have a few slides on those. There'll be more for reference at a later time if you're interested. And then we'll follow up with some resources that the commissioners have found to be very useful. And we'll have a time for questions at the end if you want to wait till then. As we proceed through, we put together a solar ad hoc committee. And as you see, we're not subject matter experts, but 3 members of that committee right now are myself, Jonathan Judkins from Surrey County, and Jamie Timberlake, the commissioner in Powhatan. I'll be leaving Commissioner of the Revenue at the end of this year. So going forward, Jonathan and Jamie will be part of this commissioner's team that will continue to track solar facilities and the impact they have in each locality. Just briefly, here's my bio, and the main thing I wanted to highlight is I had about 30 years of service in the Navy before I ran for office 18 years ago and became Commissioner of the Revenue. And I have served in this job for the last 18 years and will be leaving at the end of this year, as I did not stand for election this past year. So one way of saying is that I'm retiring. I'm just sort of slowing down, and I'll be doing some other things. And also we have Jonathan's bio up. And Jamie, we didn't get in this slide deck, but Jamie is the Commissioner of Revenue in Powhatan County and recently past president of the Virginia Commissioners of the Revenue Association. So we're very much engaged in what is going on in solar in Virginia. And I'm sure those of you who are on this webinar today are familiar with solar facilities here in Virginia. It's particularly in perhaps your localities. I've been involved over the last year with the Rappahannock River Basin Commission and their study of the impact of solar, not just revenue, but the total impact of solar in our localities. The Berkeley group has been involved in that. And my hat's off to the Rappahannock River Basin Commission for the work that they've been doing in this. And that's really how I got involved. And it's been very enlightening for me. Anyway, I hope most of us understand why the Commonwealth has gotten involved in the solar. We were being outdistanced by other states. We were not getting the solar development here. And so the General Assembly wanted to accelerate that. And that goes back at least 10 years. But these are some of the things that were being used by the General Assembly to sort of jumpstart solar facilities at certainly the utility scale here in Virginia. The heart of what we do in the taxation world goes to the Virginia Tax Code 58.1. And in that area of tax exemptions, there are 2 sections, 58.1-3660 and 3661, that address this. A couple other areas were 2636 and 2606.1. And in this slide deck, you will see that we have links to all of those. So assuming that this slide deck will be available to you after today's webinar, you can actually, if you go to the slide deck, you can actually pull up these sections of code and take a look at what they all say about solar in Virginia. Obviously, we had the general law was 3660, the local option, and now the residential exemption is in 3661. The revenue share aspect of solar energy projects and energy storage systems comes up in 2636. And then there's a section of code embedded in the State Corporation Commission, or what we call the Public Service Corporation side, that talks about local taxation for projects 5 megawatts or less. So again, Chapter 36 of the tax code talks about tax exempt property, and that's where and also in the Virginia Constitution, under the tax exempt part of it, Article 10, Section 6D, talks about that certified pollution control equipment and facilities shall be exempt from state and local taxation. And such property shall not include the land on which such equipment or facilities are located. So we do want to draw that distinction between the land and the actual machinery and tools, equipment that are part of this solar facility. So just to see how we assess and tax the land and the fencing and any other ancillary equipment with the solar facilities. So the taxation of the land, it is primarily the most common method we use is the income approach, and that is based on the land lease of the property, of the parcel. And so if that assessed value, we would take to come up with the assessed value for an acre under a solar facility, we try to find the average annual rent per acre. Now, if there's multiple parcels, multiple owners, they may have come up with different lease agreements, and they may be paid differently. And so here in Essex County, we had one facility. We tried to come up with an average rent per acre, and then using the solar cap rate which experts have given that to me. That's not an area of my expertise, but once we had that cap rate, and for example, if we determined that it was $1,000 per acre of rent going to the landowner, and using a hypothetical cap rate of 6.67%, we would then put a fair market value on that acre of land at $15,000 an acre. And in Virginia, that's not too far off. It might be less in some localities. Depends on where that acre of land is, obviously. You won't see this up in Northern Virginia very much because you're not going to see, the rents are just not going to be that low. And that's why you'll see the solar facilities, a few in Central Virginia, more likely in Southside. And then lastly, just remember that most rents do have a periodic rate adjustment where they would go up 5% every so often. Other taxation of fencing and other improvements, which is not part of the machinery and tools, is commonly valued using a cost approach. And here's just an example of how we might come up with a cost approach for the fencing and other improvements. Let me back up. No, let's go here. We're looking at revenue share here. If a electric supplier, and it could be any person owning or operating facilities for the generation, storage, transmission, or distribution of electricity for sales. And if it's designed to be 25 megawatts or less, it's assessed by, should be assessed by the locality. But I will share here briefly that it depends on a couple of things. Independent solar projects greater than 25 megawatts are treated as an electric supplier, assessed by the State Corporation Commission. And they assess that, distribute the assessed values to the electric supplier, and each locality then taxes according to its local billing and collection of taxes. Just a note, all utility-owned solar projects, in other words, Dominion Power, if it's owned by Dominion Power, it will be assessed by the State Corporation Commission regardless of its size. Again, looking at revenue share, it gives localities, and I would say particularly smaller localities that don't have a large, a mega solar facility like the one in Spotsylvania County. But if they have a lot of maybe 5 megawatts or a couple of 20 megawatt facilities in their locality, those properties may or may not be 100% exempt, depending on when their interconnection date occurred. The early projects, like the one in Essex County, are not eligible for revenue share. We came in rather early, so they were 100% exempt from taxation if it was 20 megawatts or less. But the exempt amount in localities that couldn't do revenue share depends on whether the locality has adopted revenue share. It has to be a local option adopted by the governing body in that locality. And if it is eligible for revenue share, then all projects are going to be 100% exempt. Any project, it says the exemption for solar photovoltaic projects greater than 5 megawatts is 100% of the assessed value. And that is because the locality is getting a revenue share. All right. The Commissioners of the Revenue Association and the State Corporation Commission has briefed solar facilities numerous times, Department of Taxation. And in the end, for the commissioners, we decided to try to come up with a table rather than try to explain each and every variation of code that came out. Quite frankly, the General Assembly was changing this so often and making so many changes, you could not keep up. So we have developed a 2-slide scorecard here, I'll call it, of the way things are currently, at least up through 2023. And this will give you the code, the interconnection request date, the dates that are in the Code of Virginia, the amounts of the exemptions, what's taxable, what's owned by a public service corporation, who the taxing authority is. Over in the comments, we tried to put the year it was approved, and this is generally in chronological order. So if we go to the next screen, we'll see things that were approved as recently as 2022. And a lot of that has to do in 2020 is when revenue share was implemented. And then at the end there, the last three, they're not in chronological order. They're just basically based on the megawatt size and who it's owned by. So if it's less than 25 megawatts, less than or equal to, and not owned by a public service corporation such as Dominion, it would be taxed by the locality. Less than 25, less than or equal to 25, but owned by a public service corporation, the taxing authority would be the State Corporation Commission. And again, if it's over 25, does not matter who owns it, it would be taxed by the taxing authority would be the State Corporation Commission. It still would be taxed at the local level. So now I think we're up to our first polling question.
Alrighty.
And of course, if you have questions, I see I'm not monitoring chat, but if Jillian will let me know any questions or anything, we'll try to answer them as you ask them, or we can wait till the end.
And I should note that all of these polls throughout the presentation are multiple choice options, but not all of them are multiple choice answers. Makes it a little bit more difficult, but.
Okay, I'll read it. It's 58.1, 3660 states certified pollution control equipment and facilities shall be exempt. What classes of property are subject to exemption from local taxation? There's more than one answer here. I will tell you that. More than one right answer. Just select all that apply. And this is what is subject to exemption.
Alrighty, I will go ahead and close the poll. Tommy, are you able to see the results?
I am. I see the results. Okay, the first two, energy systems and energy storage systems, are subject to exemption. The land and the fencing is not subject to exemption. The General Assembly did not include land or any of the miles of chain link fence that go around these facilities, or if they need to put some sort of a shed, or in the future, you know, there may be some other things there related to agrivoltaics. Those are still subject to a taxation and are not exempt. So the correct answer would be the first two. All right. So now we have, we're just going to briefly touch on what an energy storage system is. And these are these super batteries. And they're capable of keeping the energy stored for a period of time and redelivering it. And they are considered part of the pollution control equipment. And now I think I had a couple more polling questions.
Yep, give me 1 second.
Thank you. I also like to take a moment to welcome Jamie Timberlake. Jamie's online now, and he'll continue this the commissioner's side of keeping up on all these things after I'm gone. So I'm thankful to Jamie and Jonathan and anyone else that'll get on the team to do that. But feel free to contact them if you have questions in the future. So going back to a couple of screens earlier, we talked about three methods of appraisal. We did not talk about, there are three methods of appraisal: cost approach, income approach, sales comparison. Those are assessment terms. That's the world that we live in. If you remember, which one is the most common method of valuation of the land under solar panels? Okay, most of you got the income approach. That is correct. Income approach uses the land rent and the cap rate to determine how to value to come up with a fair market value of the land. And there's one more polling question, I think. Okay, for the fencing, which one is the most common method of valuation for the fencing? Again, this is a world that commissioners live in. We deal with this all the time, but we just wanted you to have a little, think about it a little bit, what we would use. Very good. Very good. Cost approach is what we use primarily for coming up with an assessment for the fencing and perhaps some other ancillary items. Okay, let's move on. All right, this is an area that commissioners of the revenue, assessment officials are not really involved in. I believe this is more of the planners in zoning in the local governing body. But we wanted to touch on it in our presentation because as commissioners, we do get involved in a lot of aspects of the solar facilities. Many commissioners in their localities, especially with smaller localities, I think commissioners were as much involved in what revenue was coming in as anyone in the locality. So here you see just under, and this is a section of code, not in the taxation, but under governing bodies, under cities and counties, the negotiations for a siting agreement. I would imagine that many of you as planners have been involved in this if you've had siting agreements in your locality or you've been working with a locality on a siting agreement. Don't like to call them proffers, but to me, that's what they are. And this was a means for many localities, especially as we were seeing localities not want solar facilities because it really wasn't generating a whole lot of income. These siting agreements have come into play just recently. Well, I say recently. And on this screen, talk a little bit about the powers of host localities and what the host locality has the power to do to generate siting agreements. And I've also created a link to a solar siting, energy siting agreement that Lunenburg County used, if anyone wants to look at that later on. It is binding upon the governing body and enforceable against it in future governing bodies. So a governing body cannot implement a siting agreement and then have it go away. All right. I'm sorry, I just got a little sidetracked there. Again, we're still talking about siting of solar energy facilities. You'll note that it was in the Virginia Acts of the Assembly. It was a bill passed in 2020. And just a note at the very bottom, the provisions of this act shall not apply to any solar facility that has received zoning etc., from the host locality on or before January 1, 2020. For instance, Essex County had a interconnection that goes back to 16. The facility came online in 17. We cannot have a siting agreement established for our solar facility, current solar facility here in Essex County. So there was no grandfathering into this past 2020. And we have a polling question coming up. I'm sorry, I think we have a series of polling questions coming up. Thank you.
No problem.
So this goes back to the chart we showed earlier. I think I got a little bit behind here, Jillian. So we're going to go right through these polling questions. These actually apply going back to the two slides we had, the tables that we had. Who is the taxing authority for solar facilities greater than 25 and owned by public service? It is the State Corporation Commission. That is correct. And we have 3 more polling questions here. Who is the taxing authority for greater than 25 not owned by public service corporation? Okay, if it's greater than 25 megawatts, it's going to be assessed. The taxing authority will be the State Corporation Commission. Even if it's not a public service corporation, if it's a private entity, if it's greater than 25 megawatts, State Corporation Commission will be the taxing authority. Who is the taxing authority for less than or equal to 25 and owned by a public service corporation such as Dominion? Again, this is the State Corporation Commission. If it is owned by public service corporation, even if it's less than or equal to 25 megawatts, if it's owned by Dominion Power, the State Corporation Commission will be the taxing authority. They will assess it, give that information to the locality, and we then tax it locally, but it is the taxing authority is the State Corporation Commission. All right, and we have one more polling question that goes back to the tables. Very good. It is the locality. It's less than, equal to 25, and not owned by the Public Service Corporation, in which many of these solar facilities fall into this category. Then the locality is the taxing authority, and that's where we commissioners come into play a lot, trying to figure out how they're going to be assessed, especially if the locality has not adopted revenue share. All right, now I think we have a polling question that comes up after this slide. Thank you. What is the effective date set by the General Assembly that permits solar project or energy storage project siting agreement approval by a local governing body? January 1, 2020. Any siting agreement that is in effect can only be on a project that came in after January 1 of 2020. All right, moving along, we're going to touch on the area of agrivoltaics, which is ag and solar mixed use. We're starting to see a lot more of this. I see sheep grazing under solar panels in Hanover County, just very close to the Pamunkey River. I think at the what we call the Broadest Flats area. Anyway, agrivoltaics, and I would think planners, you'll see a lot more of this coming up. And it's just the integration of solar and agriculture practices in the same locality. I mean, in the same facility. And if solar panels are, once they're installed, there is some room under those panels to do things, or in between the panels, as long as it doesn't interfere with the solar panels themselves. And some of the benefits, have to do with you can have crops there. Even there are a lot of pluses to this, and here are some of them right here. The benefits of agrivoltaics for farmers and for those who want to implement and incorporate solar facilities in rural areas. And this is one way of making solar facilities more attractive in rural areas. And these are some of the benefits. Okay, we'll have a polling question here just to deal with the agrivoltaics. I think this one is pretty obvious. I just wanted folks to think about some of these uses. All of those are correct, but the most correct answer is all of the above, all three of those that were listed. Very good. Thank you. All right, now we're going to switch from the utility scale and touch on residential and mixed use solar. And this was addressed in the tax code under 3661. Again, these are portions of the Virginia tax code that deal with tax exemption. What can be exempt from taxation? Let me interject here that in Virginia, as we would say, taxation is the rule. Everything is taxed. Exemption of tax from taxation is the exception. So the General Assembly has to explicitly tell us what we can and cannot, what we cannot tax or what we must exempt. Otherwise, we will tax it. We will assess it. And in 3661, there used to be a local option. Localities could exempt certified solar energy equipment, what we call rooftop or ground mount facilities, or on a farm, etc. Effective January 1 of 2023, the General Assembly said that these types of facilities, residential mixed use, that is less than or equal to 25 kW, kilowatts, is declared to be a separate class of property and shall constitute a classification separate from other classifications. Such facilities shall be wholly exempt. So now they are wholly exempt from taxation in Virginia. So basically, a owner can install a solar facility on a roof or ground mount. If it's in an area zoned agriculture, they may install it on the roof. And again, we've also include ground mount, and basically a ground mount solar energy generation facility shall be permitted. So rooftop ground mount under equal to or less than or equal to 25 kW will be exempt from taxation. We encourage our localities to track who has this solar, and we also encourage that there is a fair market value to it. It's just that it is now exempt. And one way we can do that in our localities is to classify it as being there and then basically depreciate it by 100%. That's one way of exempting it from taxation. But it does allow us to know where the solar facilities are, the solar residential and mixed use solar is in our localities. This is becoming more and more prevalent. And this is something you're going to see in our more densely populated areas also, not just in rural areas. We have a few slides just to give some examples of what the ground mount and the roof mount looks like. I'm sure all of you have seen these by now. And Jillian, I've messed up here. I'm going back to this slide and ask for our last polling question.
Sure thing.
What was the effective date there? The General Assembly said that these types of facilities will be wholly exempt. None of the above is correct. It was January 1, 2023. This is a very recent bill that was passed. And it's on this slide here, effective January 1, 2023. That's our last polling question. We're going to move along here. Take you through a few slides and this will be part of the presentation. I'm not going to go into these. Where we have ground mount versus roof mounts, summary.
Tommy, would you like me to pose some of the questions that you've received so far, or would you like me to save them for the end?
Yeah, you can. Let's go ahead and take them now.
Okay. So first, going back to a little bit earlier, Joe Lurch had stated that the state constitution states the General Assembly may define as a separate subject of taxation any property, including real or personal property, equipment, facilities, or devices used primarily for the purpose of abating or preventing pollution of the atmosphere or waters of the Commonwealth, or for the purpose of transferring or storing solar energy. Has there been any question as to whether standalone battery storage actually qualifies for exemption, given that it's not co-located with a solar facility? This language to the Constitution was approved by voters in '76. At that time, solar energy storage was typically thought to be thermal for hot water.
I tell you, the question from Joe Lurch, I would say Joe Lurch knows a lot more about this than I do. I tell you that's a good question. Right now, we're taking standalone. I believe what I would do is take a standalone energy storage system and say it would qualify.
Okay.
As far as it would qualify for exemption, and it would, in other words, I would treat an energy storage facility the way I would treat a solar panel facility. I'm welcome to some disagreement or some other ideas on that.
Well, if anybody has any comments on that, we'll let them
Yeah.
come in, but I will go ahead to our
Yeah,
next.
Joe's been dealing with this a lot more than I have.
Mhm.
So Joe, I would be asking you questions like that, but thank you for asking me that one.
And Joe, you are welcome to request to be unmuted
Yeah.
if you'd like to talk. But another question we had come in from, well, I believe it's a little bit more of commentary, and I'm not sure if there's anything else you'd like to add to this, Tommy, or Jamie. But Alex Long commented that the very large amount of impervious surface of solar panels actually makes SWNM, excuse me, a challenge. A number of facilities have failed or done badly, he states.
Well, I can speak from experience there in Essex County. This is when we did our facility here. Um, our permit was number 7 in the state, so we were one of the early ones, and there were many things that were not done correctly. One thing was the tremendous removal of topsoil that was done. Shocked the landowner, who was a farmer. He really was sad to see all the topsoil that was removed. And then secondly, we had terrible rains in January of 18 that led to runoff that, let's just say, gave us a black eye here in Essex County. We have not had a facility since then. And I think a lot of that has to do, there were some mistakes being made. Obviously, when in our Rappahannock River Basin Commission studied this, the compaction of soil and the pervious soil. What I'm trying to say here is that how much of it was impacted by the panels, and the determination of that kind of goes beyond what we deal with as commissioners of the revenue. But if anyone who's interested in how solar facilities impact a locality, that is definitely an area of concern. I hope I stated that coherently enough.
And it looks like Joe is requesting to speak. So if you'd like to go ahead, Joe, and comment any further on your original question.
Can you
Thanks,
hear me?
Joe.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right,
Thank you,
great.
Joe.
Hey, Tommy, thank you. I think your answer is correct in that the law is pretty clear. It's exempt because it's energy storage. My question goes to whether anybody's even questioned whether it's constitutional, because a battery storage doesn't necessarily store solar energy all the time. It's getting electrons from the grid. And then particularly if it's not even associated with a solar facility, it's a standalone battery storage. So it's just being used for grid purposes, and it's not necessarily getting solar energy. And I was just curious because that kind of struck me as odd that they passed that law.
Yeah. To me, it doesn't have to store just solar. I mean, if you had a battery or energy storage system that was storing energy from, water, or maybe one of the mining operations where out in Southwest, it's still a storage facility. My understanding is it would be exempt, but I'm welcome to hear more on that.
No, I would agree. And I think further, Tommy, it's the fact that it's in the pollution control and not specifically targeted at solar
Right.
also,
Right.
furthers your explanation.
But
Thanks.
thanks, Joe, for bringing that up.
Jamie, I see that you were answering some questions for Michael Callahan in regards to which crops are best for agrivoltaics. Would you like to comment on any of those for the whole audience, if you think it's important to know?
I think everybody can see the webinar if they wanted to, but I mean, the question was basically what kind of crops work. And Most of the time, basically, it's going to be manually harvested crops. Obviously, you can't operate, much large machinery around these things unless they really elevated the panels. But that is part of it, is elevating the panels so the structure that's underneath the ground mounted is actually increased and allows space underneath of them for them to actually farm. And like I say, most of it is small vegetable type hand harvested stuff. Not any, you're not going to see soybeans under there that somebody's running big combines through. They haven't gotten that technology figured out yet, but there are a lot of crops that operate under them because the panels move in an array. So at some point there is, not always shade on the ground, and the crops, especially crops that are more shade tolerant, have the opportunity to grow.
I think sheep have been the biggest, sheep herding has been the biggest use that we've seen. Also, some are growing flowers and pollinators for bees. So that's another area. If anyone wants to ask, do we as tax assessors think that we could treat the land under solar panels for land use assessment? The answer is no, at least not in Essex County. It's going to be commercial, even if it's being used for some agricultural purpose. But that has yet to be challenged here, and it might be challenged at some point here in Virginia, in some locality.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I'm gonna let you go ahead and finish up your presentation, but before we do that, one more question that might be best to answer now from a Jacob past week. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name. Are siting agreements more beneficial or preferred over a 2232 comp plan consistency review paired with a traditional special use conditional use set of approved conditions? Sorry, that was a mouthful.
Yeah. And the answer I would say is it depends.
Tommy's answer to everything is it depends. I was waiting for him to say it. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, the answer is, Jacob, that's got to be your locality's decision. And that's why we kind of put that back on planners. We can help you if you're asking from a specifically tax question, then hopefully your commissioner or your assessor in your county can do those numbers for you as the difference between the two. I've done that multiple times for my board. But when you use the word beneficial, that isn't necessarily just taxes. So that your locality has to decide where they want to be in those things. My locality, I've had a couple of side conversations with some of the planners that are on this call and lots of other constitutional officers as far as commissioners and assessors. For Powhatan, it was actually negative for us to go the cap that they had on the agreements before they had the open agreements. When we had the site agreements now that we're looking at, I think you have a lot more flexibility. But when they did the original revenue sharing, it was actually detrimental to us tax wise to go with that revenue share because we were getting less money in taxes over a 30 or a 35 year of the lifespan of the solar industrial facility. I don't call them solar farms. They're industrial facilities. That's, from my perspective, that's what they are.
I won't use the word farm any.
Yeah. And so when we looked at it from our specific scenario, it was tax wise, it was more beneficial for us to not do it. Now that they have the siting agreements, we haven't had any new ones come up since then, where that gives your planners and your board a whole lot more leeway left and right. It's just kind of like proffers were no for a while, and now they're kind of coming back around. You can sit down and basically get any kind of agreement out of it. It doesn't have to be tied to the specific site. You can get money to buy a new fire truck. You can get money to buy, that with the siting agreements, it kind of opened the doors for these negotiations. But as Tommy said, on the land use stuff, a lot of this hasn't been challenged in court yet. So it'll be interesting to see how far some localities are able to push it tax wise and what they can get out of some of the the developers that are doing these solar sites.
Okay, I'm gonna move on unless we have any more questions right now. We're getting close to the end. We'll certainly entertain a question or two at the end. As part of our presentation to multiple groups, we've included a few slides dealing with solar shingles, solar panels, just to give folks, a little bit of information. We're at the end of the presentation. I wanted to provide some resources. These are all links. DEQ done a lot of work, especially in the area of permits by rule. If you want to see where facilities are, this is the best resource. And with dates and sizes and lots of good information, DEQ keeps this up to date almost on certainly a weekly basis. The permit by rule status report. They have information on decommissioning and these other areas. Obviously, the energy in Virginia Energy, they have a tax model that is helpful in determining whether revenue share or taxation, even with percentages of exemption, are which best for your locality. And I haven't had to use this yet. Jamie may have used this when he was doing some of his work for Powhatan. This is a membership organization. To see a lot of the information, you would have to be a member, but maybe some of you are members of the SEIA. But they do have some good information available to the general public. Weldon Cooper did a tremendous job in a solar survey last year. No, excuse me, I guess it was back in 21. But that's a good resource. And then lastly, I want to touch on the Center for Infrastructure and Economic Development. This is a nonprofit, and for localities that would like help, they come in and do this for free. So keep them in mind if you're in a locality, if you're a planner or in zoning and your locality is looking at some of these issues, these folks are willing to come in and give a hand. And lastly, if there are any further questions from the group, we'll entertain them now.
It looks like we did have a question from Emilio. Emilio is asking, has said, I have seen floatable solar arrays on dams and ponds.
Yeah.
How would these be assessed or taxable?
Oh boy. My easy answer is it depends. But if that pond or lake or whatever is being assessed, you've turned it, for instance, in my locality, we might assess a pond at $2,000 an acre. You put a solar facility out there, you've turned it into a commercial or an industrial operation. And I would say that pond is now worth a lot more on the fair market as far as the land. The panels themselves, that would be in accordance with whatever the code says. But as far as what the real estate under those panels, I would think it would be a commercial operation, and it would depend a lot on how much the owner of that property was getting paid in rent to allow those panels to be there. But I have seen examples of that, and I think that is an interesting use. I'm not sure I'd want to go swimming in that locality. I mean, in that lake or pond, but with solar panels there. But I don't really know, but I would assume it would be the same as if it was on land.
We have another question from Paul Hester, or Hester, excuse me. Does your locality have a solar energy? I may be reading this wrong. I'm sorry. Does your locality have a solar energy equipment tax exemption form that's filled out by your inspections department and then used by your office?
No. We submit to all of our commercial or businesses a property form every year and ask for what their assets are, and they're to report those assets to my office. And then based on what the Code of Virginia tells me, I then have to exempt all or a portion of it. If I have a revenue share, I would exempt all of it. In the case of the one in my locality, because of its implementation date, it's 100% exempt. So if I get an asset sheet that says they have $30 million of an original cost of equipment, I exempt the revenue from all $30 million and get nothing. But I don't get anything from building and zoning. It's something that the commissioner's office deals directly with the owner of the facility. Jamie, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, just to expand, I mean, it's basically business personal property or M&T. I mean, they're reporting it to us just like any other business would report their tools and their desks and their shopping
Right.
carts and the things that they use in their business. And then we have to take that information, as Tommy said, and apply our depreciation schedule to it. So Tommy has one that's completely exempt. I have one that's completely exempt because of its date prior to 2015. But then I also have two that are on sliding scales. So I had to lay them out. You know, basically they told us their original value. Then we have to apply depreciation schedules. And then we also, after you depreciate, have to apply a percentage of exemption to that year. And then the following year it changes because that exemption goes down over a 5-year period. So it's interesting. And the way the code is written, it's actually kind of vice versa to the way that my mind works anyway. An 80% exemption means I'm only charging it 20% of its value. And then it goes the other way. So the next year after that, it's a 70% exemption. So I'm charging them 30%. It's I mean, it takes a little bit to get it set up, but after you're working it and you keep it consistent on that one, you have to keep each one of your solar facilities separate as to when they came into play, because all of them are under a different set of rules based on their interconnection date.
We don't rely on any outside source for that information. We handle that directly with the owner of the equipment. Of course, if it's being reported by the State Corporation Commission, it's what they report to us.
Alrighty. Well, we are a little bit past 1 o'clock, but I'm so appreciative for Tommy and Jamie's time, and we're getting loads of thank yous in the chat. It was incredibly informative webinar. I think our attendees learned a lot about taxing authorities, exemptions, revenue options, and as Tommy mentioned many times, a lot of this depends.
Right.
On certain situations. So
well, thank you for the opportunity to share this information with the Virginia chapter of the American Planning, you planners. Thank you very much.
We're glad to have hosted you. And all attendees, keep your eyes peeled on your inboxes. We'll be sending a follow-up email in the coming days, which will include the slide deck, and our contact information for our two speakers, along with the link to the webinar recording, which will be on our chapter's YouTube page. But feel free to reach out if you have any questions. But again, thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you so much to Tommy and Jamie.
Okay. Y'all be safe.
Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you, Jillian.